Hi guys. Today's topic is about national differences. In specific, differences in political, economic, and legal system. There are three learning objectives in this topic, and I hope that by the end of this topic, you should be able to first understand how the political system of countries differ. Second, understand how the economic system of countries differ. And third, understand how the legal system of countries differ. International business is much more complicated than domestic business because countries differ in many ways. Countries have different political, economic, and legal systems. All these differences can and do have major implications for the practice of international business. They have a profound impact on the benefit, cost, and risk associated with doing business in different countries, the way in which operation in different countries should be managed, and the strategy international firms should pursue in different countries. The political system of a country shapes its economic and legal system. As such, we need to understand the nature of different political systems before discussing economic and legal system. By political system, we mean the system of government in a nation. Political system can be assessed according to two dimensions. The first is the degree to which they emphasize collectivism as opposed to individualism. The second is the degree to which they are democratic or totalitarian. These dimensions are interrelated. Systems that emphasize collectivism tend to lean toward totalitarianism, whereas those that place a high value on individualism, they tend to be democratic. However, a large gray area exists in the middle because it is possible to have democratic societies that emphasize a mix of collectivism and individualism. Similarly, it is possible to have totalitarian society that are not collectivist. Collectivism refers to a political system that stresses the primacy of collective goals over individual goals. When collectivism is emphasized, the needs of society as a whole are generally viewed as being more important than individual freedoms. In such circumstances, an individual rights to do something may be restricted on the ground that it runs counter to the good of society or to the common good. The opposite of collectivism, individualism, refers to a philosophy that an individual should have freedom in his or her economic and political pursuit. In contrast to collectivism, individualism stresses that the interests of the individual should take precedence over the interests of the state. Democracy and totalitarianism are at different ends of a political dimension. Democracy refers to a political system in which government is by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representative. Totalitarianism is a form of government in which one person or political party exercises absolute control over all spheres of human life and prohibits opposing political parties. Democracy and individualism go hand in hand, as do the communist version of collectivism and totalitarianism. As I mentioned earlier, however, gray area exists. It is possible to have a democratic state in which collective values predominate, and it is also possible to have totalitarian state that is hostile to collectivism and with some degree of individualism, particularly in the economic sphere, is encouraged. For example, China and Vietnam have seen a move toward greater individual freedom in the economic sphere, but those countries are still ruled by parties that have a monopoly on political power and constrain political freedom. The pure form of democracy, as originally practiced by several city-states in ancient Greece, is based on the belief that citizens should be directly involved in decision-making. In complex advanced societies with population in the tens of hundreds of millions, this is impractical. Most modern democratic states practice representative democracy. The United States, for example, is a constitutional republic that operates as a representative democracy. In a representative democracy, citizens periodically elect individuals to represent them. These elected representatives then form a government whose function is to make decisions on behalf of the electorate. In a representative democracy, elected representatives who fail to perform this job adequately will be voted out of office at the next election. In a totalitarian country, all the constitutional guarantee on which representative democracy are built, such as individual right to freedom of expression and organization, a free media, and regular election, are denied to the citizen. In most totalitarian states, political repression is widespread. Free and fair elections are lacking. Media are heavily censored. Basic civil liberties are denied, and those who question the rights of the rulers to rule find themselves imprisoned or worse. Four major forms of totalitarianism exist in the world today. Until recently, the most widespread was communist totalitarianism. Communism, however, is in decline worldwide, and most of the Communist Party dictatorship have collapsed since 1989. Exceptions to this trend so far are China, Vietnam, Laos, North Korea, and Cuba. Although most of these states exhibit clear signs that the Communist Party monopoly on political power is eroding. In many respects, the governments of China, Vietnam, and Laos are communist in name only because those nations have adopted wide-ranging market-based economic reform. There remain, however, totalitarian states that deny many basic civil liberties to their citizens. A second form of totalitarianism might be labeled theocratic totalitarianism. Theocratic totalitarianism is found in states where political power is monopolized by a party, group, or individual that governs according to religious principle. The most common form of theocratic totalitarianism is based on Islam and is amplified by states such as Iran and Saudi Arabia. These states limit freedom of political and religious expressions with law based on Islamic principle. A third form of totalitarianism might be referred to as tribal totalitarianism. Tribal totalitarianism has arisen from time to time in African countries such as Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. A fourth major form of totalitarianism might be described as right-wing totalitarianism. Right-wing totalitarianism generally permits some individual economic freedom, but restrict individual political freedom, frequently on the grounds that it would lead to the rise of communism. A common feature of many right-wing dictatorships is an overt hostility to socialist or communist ideas. Many right-wing totalitarian governments are backed by the military, and in some cases, the government may be made up of military officers. It should be clear from the previous section that political ideology and economic system are connected. In countries where individual goals are given primacy over collective goals, we are more likely to find market-based economic system. In contrast, in countries where collective goals are given preeminence, the state may have taken control over many enterprises. Markets in such countries are likely to be restricted rather than free. We can identify three broad types of economic system: a market economy, a common economy, and a mixed economy. But in this slide, we have one additional type of economic system, a traditional economy, which is also the oldest form of economic system. In a pure common economy, the government plans the goods and services that a country produces, the quantity in which they are produced, the prices at which they are sold. Consistent with the collectivist ideology, the objective for a common economy is for government to allocate resources for the good of society. In addition, in a pure common economy, all businesses are state-owned, the rationale being that the government can then direct them to make investments that are in the best interest of the nation as a whole rather than in the interest of private individuals. Historically, common economies were found in communist countries such as Cuba, where collectivist goals were given priority over individual goals. In a pure market economy, all productive activities are privately owned, as opposed to state. The goods and services that a country produces are not planned by anyone. Production is determined by the interaction of supply and demand, and signaled to producer through the price system. If demand for a product exceeds supply, prices will rise, signaling producer to produce more. If supply exceeds demand, prices will fall, signaling producer to produce less. In this system, consumers are sovereign. These purchasing patterns of consumer as signal to producer through the mechanism of the price system determine what is produced and in what quantity. Now, how about a mixed economy? Mixed economies can be found between market and common economies. In a mixed economy, certain sectors of the economy are left to private ownership and free market mechanism, while other sectors have significant state ownership and government planning. Mixed economies were once common throughout much of the developed world, although they are becoming less. In mixed economy, government also tend to take into state ownership troubled firms, whose continued operation is thought to be vital to national interests. For example, in 2018, the United States government took an 80% stake in AIG in order to stop that financial institution from collapsing. The theory being that if AIG did collapse, it would have serious consequences for the entire financial system of the country. Now we're going to talk about the types of legal system. The legal system of a country refers to the rules or laws that regulate behavior along the processes by which the law are enforced and through which redress for grievances is obtained. The legal system of a country is of immense importance to the international business. A country law regulates business practice, define the manner in which business transactions are to be executed, and set down the rights and obligations of those involved in business transactions. The legal environments of countries differ in significant ways. As we shall see, differences in legal system can affect the attractiveness of a country as an investment site or market. Like the economic system of a country, the legal system is influenced by the prevailing political system, although it is also strongly influenced by historical tradition. The government of a country define the legal framework within which firms do businesses, and often the laws that regulate business reflect the ruler's dominant political ideology. For example, collectivist inclined totalitarian states tend to enact laws that severely restrict private enterprise, whereas the law enacted by government in democratic state where individualism is the dominant political philosophy, they tend to be pro-private enterprise and pro-consumer. Here, we focus on several issues that illustrate how legal system can vary and how such variation can affect international business. There are three main types of legal system or legal traditions in use around the world: common law, civil law, and religious law, or commonly known as theocratic law. Common law refers to the system which evolved in England over hundreds of years. It is now found in most Great Britain's former colonies, including the United States. Common law is based on tradition, precedent, and custom. Tradition refers to a country's legal history, precedent to cases that have come before the courts in the past, and custom to the ways in which laws are applied in specific situations. When law courts interpret common law, they do so with regard to this characteristic. This gives a common law system a degree of flexibility that other systems lack. Judges in a common law system have the power to interpret the law so that it applies to the unique circumstances of an individual cases. In turn, each new interpretation set a precedent that may be followed in future cases. As new precedent arise, laws may be altered, clarified, or amended to deal with the new situation. A civil law system is based on detailed set of laws organized into courts. When law courts interpret civil law, they do so with regard to this court. More than 80 countries, including Germany, France, Japan, and Russia, operate with a civil law system. A civil law system tends to be less adversarial than a common law system because the judges rely on detailed legal codes rather than interpreting tradition, precedent, and custom. Judges under a civil law system have less flexibility than those under a common law system. Judges in a common law system have the power to interpret the law, whereas judges in a civil law system have the power only to apply the law. Religious or theocratic law. A religious law system is one in which the law is based on religious teaching. Islamic law is the most widely practiced theocratic legal system in the modern world, although usage of both Hindu and Jewish law persisted into the 20th century. Islamic law is primarily a moral rather than a commercial law, and is intended to govern all aspects of life. Corruption has been well documented in every society, from the bank of the Congo River to the palace of the Dutch royal family, from Japanese politicians to Brazilian bankers, and from government officials in Zimbabwe to the New York City Police Department. The government of the late Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines was famous for demanding bribes from foreign businesses wishing to set up operation in that country. The same was true of government officials in Indonesia under the rule of former President Suharto. No society is immune to corruption. However, there are systematic differences in the extent of corruption. We can see from this slide, it shows the country corruption rankings in 2019. Those that in red color indicated highly corrupted countries, whereas those in orange to yellow color indicate that the country are very clean. In some countries, the rule of law minimizes corruption. Corruption is seen and treated as illegal, and when discovered, violators are punished by full force of the law. In other countries, the rule of law is weak and corruption by bureaucrats and politicians is rife. Corruption is so endemic Corruption is so endemic in some countries that politicians and bureaucrats regard it as a perk of official and openly flout laws against corruption. This seems to be the case in Brazil. The situation there may be evolving in a more positive direction. So we can see that in this slide, which countries are least and most corrupt. So we can see that yellow color indicated low corruption, whereas red color indicated medium and high corruption. So we can see that United States basically rank among those with low corruption, whereas China and India are ranked as two countries with high corruption. Economic evidence suggests that high level of corruption significantly reduce the foreign direct investment, level of international trade, and economic growth rate in a country. By siphoning off profits, corrupt politicians and bureaucrats reduce the returns to business investment and hence reduce the incentive of both domestic and foreign businesses to invest in that country. The lower level of investment that result hurts economic growth. Therefore, we will expect countries with high level of corruption such as China, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Russia to have a lower rate of economic growth that might otherwise have been the case. So that's all for now. Thank you and see you in the next topic. Bye.